10 real-life gentlemen criminals. Welcome back to Creepshow, your ultimate destination for thrilling tales and unsolved mysteries. Today, we're diving into the intriguing world of gentlemen criminals, those suave, sophisticated lawbreakers who operated by their own code of honor. From the Irish Robin Hood to the Debonair Tome Raider, these 10 fascinating figures lived lives of crime with an unexpected touch of class. So grab your favorite drink, settle in, and let's uncover the stories of the top 10 real-life gentlemen criminals. When compared to regular criminals, there is a certain kind of lawbreakers that adhere to their own unwavering morals, behave without any malice, and exude an appearance of sophistication. These types, such as the well-known A, are abundant in works of fiction. Despite the fact that he is a cricket player and abhors violence, J. Raffles does not have any issues with his own criminal behavior. However, beyond the pages of novels and movies, these characters are also present in the real world. Number 10. James Freney. James Freney, popularly referred to as the Irish Robin Hood, was known for stealing from the wealthy and then helping the less fortunate. Throughout the whole decade of the 1740s, he was a nuisance to every tax collector and coach that had the audacity to travel the highways of County Kilkenny for Ireland. However, he did adhere to his own rule, which stated, "Rob only those who are worthy of being robbed." Freney, like every other real gentleman thief, relied on his intelligence to avoid being caught. He also insisted that his gangs conform to a thieves' code of honor, which included being courteous, returning things if stolen had emotional value or the victim needed them, and helping the needy if it was possible to do so. In spite of this, he was an exceptional marksman who never stopped being afraid of getting into a fight with anyone who had wronged him. Freney, who had owning a pub in the past, was driven into a life of crime by the circumstances that he encountered in Ireland. During that time period, Ireland was being subjected to the criminal laws of England, which were designed to prevent Irish people from working in a range of professions. Freney was forced to close his tavern as a result of these oppressive rules, and to make matters worse, he was burdened with so many taxes that he had little alternative but to look for ways to circumvent the law in order to make ends meet. In just 5 short years, this pock-faced, scruffy highwayman became a champion of the common man and conducted some of the most daring heists that have ever taken place in the region. In 1749, he was taken into custody, and when authorities discovered that he had never been responsible for the death of a single person throughout all of his exploits, he narrowly avoided being executed by hanging. In later years, Freney wrote an autobiography about his experiences, but he left out all of the instances in which he had assisted individuals in paying their rent, lending them money, or providing other forms of assistance to the less fortunate. Number 9. William Simon Jacques. William Simon Jacques was a thief who operated in the cosmopolitan world of rare books, manuscripts, and maps. His intelligence is comparable to that of a genius, and he graduated from Cambridge University. During the period that he was a bandit, he presented himself as a gentleman who was well educated and enjoyed spending his free time in libraries. The fact that he was more interested in stealing books than reading them was initially concealed by the fact that he presented himself as an educated and pure-hearted individual. Jacques started stealing books in the 1990s, which was around the time that he was wrapping up his degree at Cambridge Institute of Technology. Despite the fact that the Cambridge Library was aware that some of their volumes had been stolen, they chose not to report the crimes because they were guilty of their failure to properly care for the treasures. After that, in 1996, when 2 copies of Newton's Principia Mathematica and Galileo's Sidereus Nuncius went missing, the library made the decision that it could no longer remain silent. Altogether, these 3 books were worth more than $500,000. Even yet, It took the authorities some time to determine that Jacques was the person responsible for the crime. He persisted in going to libraries all around the United Kingdom, where he would politely engage in conversation with the staff members working the desks while concealing valuable books beneath his tweed coat. Finally, a library employee caught him in the act, and from that point on, it didn't take the authorities long to identify him as the person responsible for the theft of ancient books on a regular basis. In 2002, he was arrested and sentenced to 4 years in prison for his crime. Next, when he was finally freed, he resumed his work exactly where he had left off. Through the use of fictitious names and disguises, he was able to conceal his true identity while simultaneously gaining the confidence of librarians. He had already made off with more than $1 million worth of books by this point, and the media had given him the nickname Tome Raider as a result of his legendary escapades. Until July 2010, when he was finally apprehended and sentenced to an additional 3.5 years in prison, he was able to slip through the hands of the law enforcement officials. Number 8. Elias Whitcomb. One can argue either that Elias Whitcomb was a man of honor in his true sense, or that he was simply skilled at performing the role of a man of honor. It is quite possible that he was responsible for the deaths of individuals, in contrast to the other males on this list, because he was both an organizer and a participant in the Johnson County War of 1892. People noted that he had a good personality and was a natural gentleman, despite the fact that he had this. He is honored as one of the founding fathers of Fort Collins, Colorado, and his name is even enshrined in the Cowboy Hall of Fame because of his contributions to the city. During his time in the Old West, Whitcomb was associated with some of the most dangerous individuals, such as the vicious Jacques Slade, who was known for hanging horse thieves and stage robbers on sight. When he was in the company of such rough and tumble individuals, Whitcomb was regarded as the moral compass of his posse. He frequently highlighted the admirable qualities that were present in those who appeared to be horrible. When the Johnson County War was going on, he was the leader of a vigilante organization of wealthy investors and cattlemen who were fighting against homesteaders who were stealing cattle from large ranches. There is significant debate regarding whether or not the ranchers inflated the thefts committed by the homesteaders. Additionally, Whitcomb and his men were never brought to justice for their vigilante acts and the murders that resulted from them. Whitcomb went on to become a powerful rancher himself and was instrumental in the establishment of the agricultural colony that would later become Fort Collins. If Whitcomb was not as gentlemanly as he gave the impression of being, then it is possible that his karma may eventually catch up with him. The year was 1915, and he was struck by lightning. Number 7. Peter Scott. It may be said that Peter Scott was a bit of a contradiction. Despite the fact that he had a lavish lifestyle, he had a deep-seated disdain for those who were considered to be at the pinnacle of society. According to him, he had an obscene passion for larceny, and he believed that stealing the really wealthy was the most effective method to satisfy his hunger for wealth. The statement that Scott made, "The people I burgled got rich by greed and skullduggery," gave the impression that he had no compassion for the people he had robbed. Indulging in the mechanics of ostentation was something they did because they deserved me, and I deserved them. When Scott was in his teens, he had already established himself as a skilled thief. In the beginning, he would loot luxury residences in Belfast. Over time, he would eventually expand his business to other places where the wealthy and famous congregate, such as the French Riviera. A new suit would be put on by him before each robbery, and then he would utilize his Spider-Man abilities to scale walls and drain pipes in order to gain entry to residences. Once he was inside, his attire and sophisticated demeanor gave the impression that he was someone who was a part of the household, such as a member of the staff or a visitor. The lady of the house was seen at the top of a staircase during one of the break-ins into the property. After Scott gently yelled up to her, "Everything's all right, madam," she went back to bed under the impression that he was the butler. At other occasions, if he caused the occupants of the house to get awake by accident, he would remark something along the lines of, "It's only me," and then he would continue his thefts without being questioned. Using these techniques, he was able to steal artwork, fur, and gems that were valued more than $50 million. The names Zsa Zsa Gabor, Lauren Bacall, Elizabeth Taylor, and Sophia Loren are among the most well-known of his trademarks respectively. After successfully committing more than 100 crimes, he became famous for his skills and became known as the King of Cat Burglars, Burglar to the Stars, and the Human Fly. After spending many terms in jail and frittering away his money on luxury automobiles, homes, and women, Scott spent his final days living in one of London's most dangerous neighborhoods. He was broke and living in a low-income neighborhood. In spite of this, he never failed to exude an aura of refinement, and he was frequently observed riding his bicycle around the city while wearing a silk neck scarf that was white and billowing in the breeze. Number 6. James Howze. Despite the fact that James Howze did not have a particularly long career as a bank robber, the fact that he was so committed to keeping up a dazzling appearance contributed to his being remembered. Even the Federal Bureau of Investigation referred to him as the Debonair Bandit. Beginning in November 2008, he began committing bank robberies in Chicago, and he was apprehended 2 months later. In spite of this, he was able to successfully carry out at least 5 robberies, and he arrived at each one looking absolutely impeccable. In each and every instance, Howze strolled into the bank while wearing a brown overcoat, a hat that matched, a scarf that matched, and leather gloves that matched. Therefore, he demanded the money while his face was completely exposed. Wearing a mask would have made his manner more restricted. He then strolled out the door and vanished into the crowd once the tellers had handed over the cash. He then placed the cash in his matching black leather briefcase and left the establishment. The FBI made public photographs of Howze that were obtained from surveillance footage of a bank. They were able to locate him with relative ease after receiving numerous suggestions from members of the general public. The arrest of Howze was swift, and he was subsequently sentenced to more than 5 years in prison. The way in which he is able to adorn his orange jumpsuit is not mentioned in any of the recent newspaper publications. Number 5. Bill Carlisle. A job that he pursued on a whim, Bill Carlisle was one of the last great train robbers of the American Old West. He was a member of the band known as the Carlisle Gang. For the majority of his life, he had been raised as an orphan, and during his adolescent years, he had spent his time riding trains, working in the circus, and performing various odd jobs. During the month of February in 1916, he found himself in the state of Wyoming with just a nickel in his possession and no prospects. However, he did possess a firearm in his possession. During that precise instant, he came to the conclusion that robbing a train was the most effective way for him to survive the spring. The first holdup that Carlisle committed was much like a scene from a movie. He managed to sneak onto the train and fired a warning shot into the roof in order to demonstrate that the robbery was legal. There were some people who had doubts about it. He quickly gathered the treasure while wearing a white bandana over his face. He then threw a few dollars to the porter to make up for the tips that he had missed, and he gave a man an additional silver dollar to pay for his meal. Before jumping off the train, he made his leave by sidestepping a woman who attempted to grab his gun and then bowing to her before proceeding to exit the train. Even though he came dangerously close to becoming entangled in the driving wheels of the train, he managed to make it through the jump without any injuries and with an additional $52 in his pocket. During that time period, he was known as the white-masked bandit, and he did not stop with that one theft. After committing a number of other thefts from Union Pacific Railroad, the company eventually offered a reward of $6,500 for his capture, regardless of whether he was alive or dead. In May of 1916, a posse was able to apprehend Carlisle under the influence of the substantial prize money, and he was subsequently condemned to life in jail. Later on, he managed to get away, but he was eventually caught and released on parole in 1936 for his excellent behavior. Carlisle, like other gentlemen thieves, adhered to a set of ethical principles. No one was ever harmed by him, and he never attempted to steal from women, children, or service members. When he was attempting to loot a train during one of his heists, he discovered that it was full of troops who were returning from World War I. He let the men to retain their money and claimed that he would have fought alongside them if he had not been incarcerated at the time. Number 4. Lon Perry. Lon Perry was the kind of person that most people would regard to be a model citizen throughout the late 1980s and early 1990s. In addition to being a member of the church and a father of 2 children, he had been married for 26 years and had a traffic ticket to his name. People referred to him as possessing manners that were reminiscent of Cary Grant, and if it weren't for one annoying behavior, he would have been a man who was above reproach. In terms of criminal behavior, his habit was a doozy. He had committed armed robbery more than 100 times, and he showed no signs of slowing down. How did a person who appeared to be morally upright end up living a life of crime? The only thing he was doing, according to Perry, was attempting to pay his expenses. After the energy crisis of the 1980s, Perry was let off from his position in the oil sector, where he had worked for 22 years. His financial situation as well as his mental state fell into a downward drift. In addition to being 50 years old, which is normally not the easiest age to begin a new job, he was also behind on his mortgage payments by many months, owed the Internal Revenue Service, IRS, back taxes for several years, and was attempting to send his son through college. It was his assertion that this financial pressure cooker left just 2 choices, either commit suicide or steal. He went with the second option. Perry started committing a series of robberies against business tourists at high-priced hotels across the state of Louisiana and Texas in the year 1989. In spite of this, his politeness never diminished. During the time that he was tying people up, he was known to apologize and always made an effort to ensure that the victims were as comfortable as possible. In the aftermath of the trauma, he would call the front desk of the hotel to inform the personnel that a person needed assistance in untying themselves. He would also return images that he discovered in wallets. In one incident, a man suffered a heart attack while the heist was taking place. Perry called an ambulance for him and then contacted his residence to check on him later to make sure he was okay. In spite of the fact that he used a gun to threaten his victims, the hammer was frozen and was unable to actually fire. Despite the fact that he might have been able to get away with the offenses, Perry, who is known for his unwavering courtesy, handed himself up after another individual was identified as the hotel thief. Perry stated that he simply could not allow someone else to be punished for what he had done. He was given a sentence of 35 years in jail in the year 1991. Number 3. Johnny Torrio. A Chicago crime boss in the 1920s, Johnny Torrio was one of the most successful gangsters on the East Coast. He was also a member of the Chicago mob. He was a modest and intelligent individual who, at an early age, realized that the use of diplomacy and alliances was typically more effective than the use of violence. Despite the fact that Torrio did not display any shame in racketeering, he minimized his most obscene businesses, such as running brothels. Torrio believed that he was a man of honor, and he emphasized the significance of maintaining a life that was externally distinguished and maintaining a separation between his personal and professional lives. In point of fact, he was so honorable that he became a model for a great number of young men in his town. He did this by providing them with pocket money by paying them to run errands on a regular basis. In the grand scheme of things, his morally upstanding private life allowed him to justify away his fraudulent acts. After being shot and injured, Torrio made the decision to leave the mob business. Torrio was never one to get involved in violent situations, yet it is believed that he bribed other people to kill his competitors. Despite the fact that he had given over his empire to Al Capone, he was still unable to overcome his desire to go straight. In his later years, he supported himself by engaging in activities such as bootlegging, real estate, and allegedly creating the National Crime Syndicate in the year 1934. In the end, he was sentenced to prison for tax evasion, and he passed away from a heart attack when he was sitting in a barber chair. Despite this, he will be remembered for all time as one of the pioneers of organized crime in the United States. He managed to maintain his reputation as a family man while at the same time being a family man. Number 2. Bill Miner. Billy Miner was the personification of what it meant to be an outlaw in the Old West in many respects. In addition to robbing everything from stagecoaches to railroads, he squandered the majority of his cash in dusty saloons and dance halls. He was a true highwayman. On the other hand, in contrast to other criminals, he was not renowned for spitting, cussing, or slinging guns. Rather, he was recognized for his politeness and his ability to speak softly. In point of fact, a major daily published a 4-column article about Miner following his passing. The article described him as a kind and lovable old man whose thoughts were humorous and whose manner was that of someone who was a friend to all of humanity. The most refined, the most polite, and the most revered of all men was this gentleman, a person whom they all hold in high regard and regard with fondness and something of honor. These lovely sentiments are regarding a well-known thief who had a criminal career that lasted for 45 years. Miner had earned a place of affection in the hearts of a great number of individuals by stealing almost completely from companies, with the belief that these corporations had stolen the average person. Many people were of the same opinion, and he became a folk hero in both the United States and Canada. Miner would frequently make it a point to return at least a portion of the items that he had stolen from regular people on the occasions that he was forced to steal from them in order to, for example, make it easier for him to leave town. For example, on one occasion he took $80 from a ranch hand and then returned $10 to the ranch hand. In another incident, he got away with robbing a driver of $5, his watch, and his boots, but he was kind enough to return the watch and boots after he was finished with them. Legend has it that he was also the first person to say, "Put your hands up," and nobody gets hurt. It was because of these kinds of considerate actions that he became known as the gentleman bandit. The ability to steal and to recruit a continual stream of accomplices was something that Miner possessed in an extraordinary way. His ability to avoid being caught, on the other hand, was not particularly strong. In spite of the fact that he was released from prison 4 times out of 7, he still managed to spend a total of 35 years behind bars. It was the longest criminal career of any Old West bandit, spanning from 1865 until 1911, even surpassing the legendary Jesse James in terms of length of time spent in the criminal underworld. Number 1. Charles Earl Boles, Black Bart. When Charles Boles, a former first sergeant in the Union Army, was working as a gold miner, he was contentedly eking out a living. However, shortly after the end of the Civil War, Wells Fargo dispossessed him of his land and forced him to sell it. Wells Fargo reportedly made an offer to purchase Boles' property, and when he declined, they cut off the water supply to his farm, which effectively shut down his mine. This is according to one version. Infuriated, Boles wrote a letter to his wife in which he conveyed his intention to exact revenge against the bank. The message was written in a cryptic manner. It is reasonable to believe that this is the time when his alter identity, Black Bart, was created, despite the fact that he never provided any information of his vengeance. Beginning at that point, Black Bart had his sights set on the bank, and as a result, he robbed their stagecoaches a total of 28 times. In spite of this, he maintained a civil demeanor, never caused anyone any bodily harm, and took exclusively from Wells Fargo, and never, ever from passengers. The financial institution went so far as to characterize him as being non-aggressive and polite to all passengers, as well as to ladies. With a shotgun that was so old that it could no longer fire, he didn't even bother loading it. He traveled on foot to and from the robberies he committed. This is an incredible feat. In spite of the fact that he worked constantly by himself, he would frequently put up sticks on surrounding stones in order to give the impression that he had a group of men waiting for him. Wells Fargo was not amused by the fact that he occasionally left poems behind because he was conscientious enough to do so. In his final poem he wrote, "I will now lay me down to sleep here, to look forward to the following day. Might it be victory? Or might it be defeat? An unending anguish and misery. Regardless of what happens, I'll give it a shot. It is impossible for my condition to become any worse. If there is money in that box, then continue. The money is kept in my purse." The distinctive manner in which Black Bart carried himself and his high level of sophistication made him a hero in the state of California, with the exception of Wells Fargo, and it took Pinkerton detectives more than a decade to eventually locate him. He was sentenced to 4 years of incarceration at San Quentin Prison, but he was released early in 1888 due to his good behavior. Shortly after that, he vanished without a trace, and he was never seen again. Thanks for joining us on this captivating journey into the lives of gentlemen criminals. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share with your friends, and subscribe to Creepshow for more intriguing stories and mysteries. Let us know in the comments which gentleman criminal you found most fascinating, or if you have any suggestions for future videos. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring the shadows.